The fate of a shaky ceasefire between Iran and the United States is yet again uncertain. Can Gulf diplomacy avert a direct military clash between Washington and Tehran? President Trump has confirmed they has paused a full-scale military campaign against Tehran. Much-hyped military operation, codenamed so-called Operation Sledgehammer, was set to launch in less than 24 hours. In a rare display of total unity, the governments of Saudi Arabia, the UAE and the Qatar stepped between Washington and Tehran, convincing the US president that they can negotiate a nuclear deal that could be permanent end to Iran's nuclear ambition for long without a single shot being fired.
So I was called by these three countries plus others, and they're dealing directly with our people and right now Iran. And there seems to be a very good chance that they can work something out. If we can do that without bombing the hell out of them, I'd be very happy.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says that American military remains locked, loaded and ready to strike at any moment's notice. But for now, the bombs are on hold and the clock is ticking on the most high-stake diplomatic gamble of the decade. If nuclear deal to the satisfaction of both sides, potentially dubbed as JCPOA 2.0, is not materialized, both Iran and US are ready to fire fresh shots. Will the ceasefire last long? Or is it just a matter of time before the US and Israel launch a massive high-intensity military operation? Hi, I'm Shreya and you're watching our daily geopolitical news analytical show, The Strategist. What is the offering of JCPOA 2.0? Let's dive straight into the video. Yesterday, the clock was ticking, but today the clock has paused for Iran. The standstillness of the US-Iran war has raised question on what is next. Is there going to be a nuclear deal, JCPOA 2.0? Or a failed talks culminate to prolonged war? What strategy Trump might be contemplating? The war that started on 28 February has gone through different phases of circle, with high-intensity attack to mediation talks by Oman, followed by the mediation talks by Islamabad, leading to a ceasefire on 8th of April that has been continued henceforth. The initial 2-week ceasefire has been extended to 6 weeks now, and just when President Trump was about to launch an attack on Iran under the so-called Operation Sledgehammer, the Gulf requested talks for a potential nuclear deal. Now, what is this nuclear deal likely between Iran and the US? The United States and Iran appear to be moving towards JCPOA 2.0. Amid a looming question, why did Trump withdraw from JCPOA 1 in 2018? Firstly, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was the landmark nuclear agreement finalized on 14th July 2015. A deal was signed between Iran and the P5+1 countries, namely United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, Germany, plus the European Union.
And I raise this history because it bears directly on how we respond to the Iranian nuclear program. That program has been around for decades, dating back to the Shah's efforts, with U.S. support, in the 1960s and 70s to develop nuclear power. The theocracy that overthrew the Shah accelerated the program after the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, a war in which Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons to brutal effect. And Iran's nuclear program advanced steadily through the 1990s, despite unilateral U.S. sanctions. When the Bush administration took office, Iran had no centrifuges, the machines necessary to produce material for a bomb, that were spinning to enrich uranium. But despite repeated warnings from the United States government, by the time I took office, Iran had installed several thousand centrifuges and showed no inclination to slow, much less halt, its program.
But just 3 years later, in May 2018, Trump withdrew from the JCPOA 1, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. He believed the agreement was fundamentally flawed and too favorable to Iran. Less than a week after the deal in July 2015, the then US Secretary of the State, John Kerry, in a House Armed Service Committee said that Iran had over 19,000 centrifuges and around 12,000 kg of weapon-grade nuclear fissile material that was enough to make 10 to 12 nuclear bombs. Iran would chant death to America, death to Israel. It was in the interest of every American to get rid of Iran's nuclear weapon.
They said, look, it would be great and ideal if one could negotiate that. I'm not sure how long it would take. And given the imperatives that we had with respect to Iran's 19,000 centrifuges, 12,000 kilograms of weapons fissile material equal to 10 to 12 bombs already, their mastering of the fuel cycle, and their near imminent finishing of the Iraq reactor, which would have produced weapons-grade plutonium at the rate of 2 weapons a year, we felt that we had to keep this targeted on the greatest threat of all that you've just defined, which is the potential of their having a nuclear weapon. And if indeed they're meaning to translate their slogans of death to America, death to Israel into policy, then getting rid of the nuclear weapon is everybody's first imperative here. So that's what we focused on, because we knew that you could get tangled up. Our definition, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. You can be fighting forever on the issue of Sunni, Shia, definitions of who's protecting whom, and you won't get anywhere. You literally will not get there. That's why we separated those activities. Now, that does not reduce our commitment, as we've defined here again and again, to push back on every one of those activities. But it's easier to put...
The decision fundamentally reshaped Middle Eastern geopolitics, driven by 5 core motivations from the Trump administration. First, Washington fiercely opposed the deal's sunset clause, which set key restrictions on Iran's centrifuges and enrichment to expire after 10 to 15 years. The administration argued this merely delayed rather than permanently blocked an Iranian nuclear weapon. Second, the JCPOA criticized by the Trump administration for its narrow scope. By focusing strictly on nuclear infrastructure, it ignored Iran's ballistic missile program and regional proxy networks. With nuclear weapon, ballistic missile is the delivery vehicle, and Iran fiercely pursued the ballistic missile development program. Officials contended that billions in sanction relief were actively being used to fund militias in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Third, the move aligned with intense regional pressure from key US allies, specifically Israel and Saudi Arabia, who felt directly threatened by the resurgent Tehran. This was amplified in early 2018 when Israel presented intelligence claiming Iran had hidden past weapon research. Fourth, the withdrawal acted as the catalyst for Trump's maximum pressure campaign. By choking off Iranian oil exports and serving its access to international banking, the administration aimed to cripple Iran's economy and force them to negotiate a much tougher successor deal. And finally, domestic politics played a major role, dismantling the signature Obama-era accord, fulfilling a core 2016 campaign promise to the Republican base.
Among U.S. policymakers, there's never been disagreement on the danger posed by an Iranian nuclear bomb. Democrats and Republicans alike have recognized that it would spark an arms race in the world's most unstable region and turn every crisis into a potential nuclear showdown. It would embolden terrorist groups like Hezbollah.
The aftermath remains highly polarized. While supporters argue that ensuring sanctions successfully drained Tehran's revenue and restored US leverage, critics point out that geopolitical fallout.
That some of the limitations regarding Iran's peaceful program last only 15 years. But that's how arms control agreements work. The first SALT treaty with the Soviet Union lasted 5 years. The first START treaty lasted 15 years. And in our current situation, if 15 or 20 years from now Iran tries to build a bomb, this deal ensures that the United States will have better tools to detect it, a stronger basis under international law to respond, and the same options available to stop a weapons program as we have today, including, if necessary, military options.
Well, Obama had virtually no deal. Obama had a road to a nuclear weapon, and I terminated that deal. And if I didn't terminate Barack Hussein Obama, if I didn't terminate that deal, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon 2 years ago. As you know, that deal long expired.
It's taken the most years doing it, and after your bombing, then
you know what? I'll tell you what. I know you backed Obama, which shows what a fraud you are, because that was the worst deal. They would have had a nuclear weapon within a period of a year and a half after I terminated it. If I didn't terminate that, and if I didn't send the B-2 bombers in 9 months ago to obliterate, you know, one thing that did happen, which was very nice, the top person in Iran representing them was the top person. He said, I'm the only one, meaning the United States is the only one, along with possibly China, that would be able to get the nuclear dust out of that disaster that we created with the B-2 bomber.
Iran eventually abandoned its enrichment cap, pushed closer to weapon-grade capability, and severely restricted international inspection, leading directly to the heightened regional instability seen today in the Persian Gulf region.
Which direction would you like us to rotate? Right standard rudders heading on course 350. Rudder vessel Molly, this is warship 112. We will be escorting you to your next port of call. Thank you for your cooperation. This is warship 112, standing by at channel 16.
It's clear that Iran, that agreed for JCPOA 1, pushed itself to enrich uranium from sanctioned 3.67% to 60% secretly. IAEA confirms that Iran has 440 kg of uranium. The world understands initial direct Chinese support to Iran's nuclear weapon to indirect support of its ballistic missile program in later years after China agreed for UN resolution sanctioning Iran against the developing nuclear weapon capability.
The question then is not whether to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but how. Even before taking office, I made clear that Iran would not be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon on my watch.
Leading to the current world tension, the Gulf might have proposed a nuclear deal which might be JCPOA 2.0. The possible JCPOA 2.0 is what we see as an ultimate beam of hope for the end of the war. But it will not be an easy nut to crack since the conflicting nature of demand between the US and Iran. According to reports, Washington is demanding a complete halt to high-level enrichment, long-term restrictions, and the total removal or export of Iran's near-weapon-grade uranium stockpile. While Tehran is pushing back, they are ready to cap enrichment at a low civilian level, likely around 3.67%, and dilute or export their remaining 60% enriched uranium. But they refuse to completely surrender their basic enrichment rights. The US wants a strict 20-year lock on these limits, while Iran is holding out for just 5. We can expect the final compromise to land somewhere between 10 to 15 years, backed by highly intrusive inspections. But timeline means nothing without verification. The Arms Control Association noted that international inspectors lost critical visibility into parts of Iran's program during the recent conflict. To fix this, the New Deal forces the return of the strict IAEA monitoring, which would include surprise inspection, 24/7 camera feeds, centrifuge tracking, and real-time uranium accounting at both declared and undeclared side. And in exchange, Iran gets economic oxygen. Tehran's economy is under severe pressure, making sanction reliefs their top priority. Reports suggest potential US concession could include unfreezing overseas assets, allowing limited oil export and easing banking restrictions. The big formula for compromise also comes down to the physical removal of highly enriched uranium, likely transferring it abroad to nations like Russia. This cuts Iran's breakout time, the time needed to build a nuclear weapon, allowing Iran to make civilian energy infrastructure while losing immediate weapon capability. Unlike the 2015 deal, the negotiation is happening after direct military confrontation. So the package may also include reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, maritime security guarantees, and limits on attack by regional proxies. Speaking of Gulf negotiators, even if they aren't formal signatories, the Gulf states are set to heavily influence its new framework. Now, don't expect the Gulf states to formally sign the document. Iran traditionally resists expanding the core negotiators to regional rivals, meaning the main signatories will likely remain the US, Iran, and the European powers, followed by Russia, China, and the IAEA. Instead, we could look for Gulf integration through the parallel talks, side agreements, and regional security framework. The bottom line, JCPOA 2.0 cannot succeed in a vacuum. To build a lasting truce, Washington must balance Tehran's nuclear limits with the Gulf security demand. But nonetheless, if this JCPOA 2.0 fails, what could be Trump's full large-scale assault on Iran he warned us of? What next for the future we will discuss in our next episode of The Strategist. I'm Shreya signing off for now. Keep watching National Defense.